Alrighty, so this is the build that I've been running. It is the Blizzard build. Well, technically it's actually Glacial, because Glacial is what's doing all the damage. Blizzard is just what's being used to activate Glacial. So the damage of Glacial is what's driving this entire build. So in order to do a lot of damage, you want to have a high level of Glacial and a high roll. And ideally you want to put this on an Amulet because this gives you the most amount of power. We want to be using one-handers because the stats on the one-handers is a lot more valuable and we can cast a lot faster. We don't want to put Glacial on a two-hander because it's too slow and we're losing a lot of cooldown reduction, which we need. And as well as some other good stats like resource regen. So for the helmet, we have Godslayers. So I was experimenting with either Harlequins or Shaco. And Godslayer is just a lot more damage because it gives you 60% multiplicative against the boss or for any elites. Now it only lasts for 3 seconds, but the good thing about Blizzard builds is that you could put a good stack of Blizzards before the boss even spawns. So by the time the boss spawns, you're able to utilize this a whole lot more. The other thing is pretty nice, since we're not using raiment, the Godslayer pulls enemies in every 12 seconds. So that's also pretty nice as well. Reason we're not using Harlequins or Shaco is because Blizzard doesn't really scale off ranks because most of the driving force is from Glacial. Blizzard in of itself doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. The cooldown reduction with +4 to everything is very nice. I would say that. Faster cooldowns, more defenses. But we want more damage. And since we really don't need the extra defense, I just go for more damage. And that's the main reason. So for the second option, we need a defensive option. And it's between Disobedience and Juggernaut. I choose Juggernaut because it's just a flat amount up front. Versus Disobedience, you have to stack it up. And if you're traveling in between packs, your armor might fall off and you might be more prone to getting one shot. So I just use Juggernauts just to have upfront armor at all times. Also, for example, there might be like boss intermissions or the boss might jump up. Your Disobedience stacks might fall off just for like a little bit. Whereas Juggernaut, you're always going to have the armor up front. The downside is that your evade is a lot longer. And since we're using Essus, we want to keep evading so we can have more crit chance. So that is the downside with this, is that our evade cooldown is a lot longer. So you can experiment if you want to use Juggernauts or Disobedience. I prefer Juggernauts because it's just up front at all times. With the gloves, I'm using Frozen Tundra. The main reason is for the secondary effect. Your ice spikes have an increased 50% explosion radius. That is the only reason we have these gloves. Since some boss targets are pretty small, we want our glacial spikes to hit as many targets as possible. So that's why we're using glacial. The deep freeze doesn't really matter since we're not using deep freeze in this build. You can use deep freeze if you want, but I prefer not to. And I'll explain that in a little bit. To bolts, this gives you a lot of damage, 40%. It also gives you a lot of mana back. So it gives you 50 of your primary resource, plus whatever your resource regen is on your rings and your amulet. Well, not amulet, but I would say rings and offhand gives you a pretty good amount of resource regen. So this gives you actually a lot more than 50 of your primary. It actually gives you almost full mana whenever you use teleport and flame shield. So how this works is that you would drop down like 3 or 4 blizzards and your mana will be empty. You press teleport and you get full mana back. You cast 4 more blizzards, press flame shield, you get more mana back. Cast 4 more blizzards, press teleport, and you just keep repeating. So I'll just show you an example. So 1, 2, 3, 4, teleport, 1, 2, 3, 4, flame shield, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it teleports back up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So the more cooldowns you have, the more efficient this becomes, but generally that's the playstyle. We're using Asus because of the crit chance. So whenever you evade, like right here, have 27%. Whenever you evade, you get a good amount. I have 45. These aren't really good rolls, but it could be better. So you might get up to 50% or more, depending on what you have. For the weapon, I'm using a dagger because damage to close is very nice on the implicit. We're not using a wand because we don't really have too many lucky hit procs. On the weapon, I'm using all stats, crit damage, vulnerable, and damage to close. Intel is okay, but Intel boosts skill damage, and skill damage boosts Blizzard, and it doesn't matter for Blizzard. We're using Glacial as our main driving force for damage. Unless I'm mistaken and Intel does buff Glacial, then I could be wrong. But if so, please let me know. For the dagger, I'm using Storm Swell. Let me just go back real quick. For the chest piece, I am using Juggernauts, and I have max life, damage reduction from close, and strength. Ideally, you would want as much damage reduction as possible. So you want a lot of defense on your chest piece. For your gloves, it's pretty standard. You want attack speed, critical strike chance. Ideally, you would want a chance to restore a resource instead of fight. And lucky hit chance is okay. But these gloves, they don't have really good rolls, but that's what I have. Okay, for the offhand, we're using 2 one-handers because the offhand gives us a lot of good stats, a lot of cooldown reduction. For the offhand, you definitely want cooldown reduction and resource regen. And ideally, you would want mana cost reduction and all stats, or crit chance is also pretty good. But this is probably the best one that I have right now. Alright, for your ring, you're going to use Tarashas. This gives you a lot of multiplicative damage every time you use a different element. So we have ice, lightning, and fire. Our flame shield also gives us fire, since we are not using firebolts. So that gives us 3 different elements, and sometimes a dungeon will give you poison when you evade, and I'll give you a 4th one as well. Alright, for this other ring, I have max life, resource regen, damage to close, and cold damage. The cold damage could be replaced with critical strike chance. Cold damage isn't bad because this buffs one of our Paragon nodes, and I'll show you real quick which node I'm talking about. This one, Frigid Freeze. So the more cold damage you have, the more this node gets buffed up, so you can get a pretty good amount of multiplicative damage. And since we're using Blizzard, cold damage is also pretty nice. So for the offhand, I'm using Conceited. This also gives you more damage. And then for the ring, I have Asus Ferocity, gives you attack speed when you have both stacks. Now, there's this funny interaction in the game that still hasn't been fixed, but Asus Ferocity works on all abilities. So what does this mean? Is that you can use Blizzard and use this key passive, and you'll get critical strike damage and crit chance. And since you're able to use this, you can also use this as well. So now you have 50% attack speed, which means you can cast faster. So your GCD between Blizzard cast is very quick. So if you look over here, my attack speed bonus is only at 10%. But when I have Asus Ferocity, it gives me another 50%. So that will be a total of 60. And then you're probably wondering why I'm using Unstable Currents. Well, I'm mostly using it just for the attack speed. It gives me another 25%. So I would be almost at 100% attack speed, almost, but I'm a little bit off. So I'll be like at 85%. And so my GCD between Blizzard cast is very fast. So I sometimes struggle with mana. But I'll show you how I get around that in a little bit. But that's what I have so far. For the enchantments, I'm using Chain Lightning and Ball Enchantment. But these are the stats that I'm using. We have 1 point into Chain Lightning, Enhanced Chain Lightning, and Destructive. The reason we're using Chain Lightning as our enhance is because it generates crackling energy. And this is going to be our mana battery against bosses and stuff like that. We have 1 point into Flame Shield, and we have Mystical. The reason for this is just allows us to cast like an extra 2 or 3 blizzards when we have our Flame Shield up. So we have more blizzard uptime that we can cast. 1 point into Teleport, Enhanced, and Shimmering. This gives us damage reduction, and it synergizes to balls, so we get more mana back. 3 points into Glass Cannon. Have Ice Armor. And 1 point into Elemental Attunement. It gives us a chance to get one of these back. Okay. Down here, we have 1 point into Lightning Spear, Enhanced, and Invoked. So Lightning Spear now, whenever it hits targets, it gives us vulnerable. So this is very nice. It also stuns them, so it helps us stay alive a lot longer. So that we can go into a room, press Lightning Spear, all the targets become vulnerable, and they're stunned, so they don't hit us. I have 3 points to Conjuration Mastery. So whenever Lightning Spear does proc from our cast and from our Unstable, we get a little bit extra more damage from this passive. Over here we have Align the Elements. Mana Shield, every time we spend 100 mana, which we spend very often, we have more damage reduction. And every time we use a cooldown, we have a shield. So we almost have 100% shield uptime because we're always pressing cooldowns. Okay, down here we have 1 point into Blizzard. Enhanced Blizzard, this part doesn't really matter. We just want to get to this last one. So Blizzard's duration lasts an extra 4 seconds, which is pretty nice. So we can lay this down right before the boss spawns. And we have more stacks of Blizzards happening. 1 point to Inner Flames, and then we have Devouring Blaze. This gives us more crit damage against burning enemies. You might be wondering, how are we doing burning enemies? Well, our pet is applying burning through our support skill right here, burning. So whenever Tempest hits an enemy, 50% of that is burning, and that does damage over time. And so that debuffs our targets as well. Over here we have 1 point to Ball Lightning, Enhanced, and Wizards. The main reason for this is just to generate more crackling energy. It's not necessarily about what the damage Ball Lightning does, it's just generating more crackling energy. The same reason why we have this one as well. Over here we have 1 point to Static Discharge and 3 points into Invigorating Conduit. So this generates crackling energy, and we pick it up from our mana. This is a lot more noticeable against boss targets or targets that have a lot of health. You'll be able to just keep spamming consistently. Okay, down here we have 3 points to Permafrost, Hoarfrost, Icy Touch, and then we have 2 points to Frigid Freeze. This also helps us out with mana sustain. And over here we have Unstable Currents. So the other neat thing about this is that it gives us a lot of attack speed while it's active. The other thing is, because we have Chain Lightning as our enhancement, every time we spend 100 mana, it casts Chain Lightning. So 1, 2, 3, a Chain Lightning goes off. And whenever we have Unstable Currents active, every time we spend Blizzard 3 times, it casts a Chain Lightning. And when that happens, it randomly procs another ability through Unstable Currents. But the main purpose of Unstable is just for the extra attack speed, so we just have more a shorter GCD. The other cool thing about this is that if you ever pick up a channeling shrine, those chalices or cup shrines, the ones that give you infinite mana, you can go pretty crazy with this. So you can just keep casting blizzards like every half a second and just cover the entire screen. So it's pretty cool. Alternatively, if you don't want to use this, you could just opt for Deep Freeze and then take off 1 point into Frigid Freeze and get this last one. And so what this will do is you'll be able to reset your cooldowns very fast. So for example, you could press 3 or 4 stacks of blizzards, press teleport, 4 stacks of blizzards, press flame shield, 4 stacks of blizzard, reset with Deep Freeze, cast blizzard again 4 times, teleport, cast blizzard 4 times, flame shield, cast blizzard 4 times, in very quick succession. So for example, here it is. And you can do that as well. The reason I don't run it is because when I'm, I guess, speedrunning dungeons, this part kind of slows me down quite a little bit, and I'd rather just keep going forward. So I just use this. And like I said, whenever you pick up those channeling shrines, you have infinite mana, and with this active, you can press your abilities pretty quick. The other thing to note about whenever you cast this, cast like different lightning abilities as well. And when that happens, you can generate more mana as well. So you can also sustain with that as well. Another option that you can do is that you could take points out of this and you can put points into here and you can get more damage reduction as well. So that is also a choice. Last but not least, like as I said before, Estus Ferocity works for all abilities. So this gives you the most amount of damage, and you get a 5% crit chance as well. And this also activates this, so you get more attack speed. And the more attack speed you have, the lower your GCD between Blizzard cast is reduced. Some other questions people have is about Uber Uniques. Ring of the Starless Skies is probably the best in slot because it reduces the cost of your abilities up to 4 times, up to 4 stacks, and it gives you 40% multiplier as well. So that's probably the best in slot. Another good Uber would be Duriel's, and the reason for Duriel's is that it gives you poison procs, and that gives you a 4th Tarasha stat. The other thing about Duriel's is that it also gives you, the life sustain, and it's pretty decent for AoE clears as well. I would not use a Varshan. It is not that good. I mean, you probably won't notice a difference like in the current content because everything's pretty easy, but you lose a lot of cooldown reduction, which is pretty noticeable. You also lose a lot of resource regen, and that's probably the main downsides. You also lose quite a bit of damage because you have all these damage additives, and this one doesn't have as much. It has 52%, but you need to take into account these other modifiers as well. I just prefer 2 one-handers instead. And what about raiment? Raiment is really good for bossing. It's probably your best in slot for just pure boss killing. But the issue with that is that your armor is dropped. You have no armor. And so you can get one shot if you're going to do tier 100s. So I would recommend just keeping Juggernauts for tier 100s. But if you're just going to go for like speed kills, you can just use raiment. And what about xfals? Xfals is also pretty good. It's really good for AoE clears. But it's not that great for boss killing, since it doesn't really proc a whole lot. So I would just recommend using another aspect that has damage. You can use the attack speed, since this is currently bugged. But if this were to get fixed, then I would just use a different ring that has damage on it. Alright, now we're going to talk about Paragon. So I did get inspired by another YouTuber. His name is Acruied. So kind of copied off their board a little bit, but I decided to use different glyphs just to do even more damage. So what you're gonna see here is several of these glyphs. They all have multiplier secondaries. So I have Flame Feeder in the first board. So it gives me a 10x multiplier against burning enemies. In a second, on the Burning Instinct, we are using Tactician. This gives me a 10x multiplier after using a defensive skill, which is Teleport or Flame Shield. On the third one, I have Elementalist. This gives you a total of 15 multiplier, 15x multiplier if you have cold, fire, or lightning damage to an enemy. This is on the Enhancement Master board. The next board, we are using Icefall. And we're going to use Unleashed for this one. This gives you 6.7x multiplier. The next board, we're going to use Frigid Fate. We're going to use Stalagmite. This is probably the only glyph that doesn't have a multiplier. But I could not find something else that is adequate. So I think this is probably the best option that we have, since we're using just our Glacial to do damage. The crit chance is nice, but that's about it. The next board, we're going to be using Destruction. This gives you a 12% multiplier. This is on the Ceaseless Conduit board. The next one, we're going to use Searing Heat board, and we're going to use Charged. So whenever we pick up Crackling Energy, you get 5% up to 15% multiplicative damage. And the last one, I'm going to be using Exploit. So this gives you another 10% multiplicative damage against vulnerable enemies. This is on a Static Surge board. You might be wondering why we're not using Control, why we're not using Winter. So when it comes to boss killing, a lot of the times I'm killing bosses before they're even staggered. So control only activates against crowd control targets, against chilled or frozen, stunned, or slowed. The boss is pretty much immune to that until they are staggered completely. And then that is when control works. But if you're killing bosses before they can become staggered, control is not doing anything for you. Control is pretty good for AoE trash clearing, but we're already clearing pretty quick without this, so this is fairly overkill. Perhaps when they re-release AOZ, maybe this would be used, but I'm not sure. Same thing for winter. Whenever you chill or freeze an enemy, you deal up to 15% multiplicative damage. This is pretty okay for tier 100s or trash clearing. But like I said, when it comes to bosses, you're not gonna be able to get any effect out of this until they are staggered. And if you're only fighting one boss, the most you'll get will be only 3%, unless they have ads in the way. So that is why we're not using winter or control. We're not using adept because mastery only affects our blizzard, and blizzard doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. The radius is nice, but we just want to buff our glacial damage as much as possible. Enchanter is pretty good because what Enchanter does is that we put it over here, for example. Enchanter gives us non-physical damage. As a result, it will buff our Frigid Freeze. So this will give us an additional 5% multiplicative damage if we use Enchanter. So perhaps this could be decent. But I am not quite sure if it's better than charged, because charged gives us 15. The crackling energy damage is pretty useless, but I'm just looking at the multiplicative damage. And that is about it for Paragons. Oh, one more thing, the pet, of course. So the pet, I'm using Tempest, Poison, Bleeding, and Burning. So this seems to be doing the most amount of damage against bosses. It's very noticeable, especially when they have a lot more health. It starts to ramp up. And how this works is that they start multiplying each other indefinitely. This is probably a bug, but it just keeps ramping up and up. And so like the longer the fight is, the more damage this deals. So it's quite interesting. You could, however, use resource support if you're still struggling with mana. I know sometimes I feel like I would rather use resource because it just gives you so much more sustain. So that is an option if you want to use that. You can also put resource and arcing if you want. However, arcing isn't necessary with Tempest, because what happens with Tempest is when you kill an enemy that is affected with Tempest, it spreads to an enemy, and then it spreads from there. So it just keeps on going. We're using Flash of Adrenaline. This gives you another 20% multiplier. We have cooldown reduction, and we have duration, and right here we have Safeguard. So this gives you more damage reduction. Ideally, I would want to use Genesis, but I don't have that yet. So what Genesis would do, it will bring it up from 20% to 50%. But it's a 3% drop chance, so it's pretty rare. Alright, well, that is all I have. Thanks for watching. Bye.